Congratulations, you just declared war on the wrong species. Humanity doesn't forgive. The day the stars went quiet, the signal came in broken pieces. Commander Owen Reeves was sitting in the captain's chair of the UES Ironside when the first fragment hit the communication board. It was late in the ship's night cycle. Most of the crew was asleep. The soft hum of the engines filled the bridge, and the stars outside the viewport were still and quiet, the way they always were out here near the Kepler sector. Owen had a cold cup of coffee in his hand and a report on the tablet in his lap. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. Nothing ever happened out here. Then the signal came. Lieutenant Nora Caldwell was the one who caught it first. She was seated at the intelligence station on the far side of the bridge, running her usual late-shift scans, when the alert lit up her screen. She leaned forward, pulled off her headset, and said, "Sir, you need to hear this." Owen set down his coffee and walked over. The signal was a standard colonial distress beacon. It was coming from Kepler 62F, a small colony planet about 4 hours away at full burn. The colony had been there for 11 years. Around 40,000 people called it home. Farmers, engineers, teachers, families who had packed everything they owned into transport ships and decided to build something new somewhere far from Earth. Owen had visited once, 3 years ago. He remembered wide-open fields, children running between rows of crops, a small market square where people sold food and handmade goods on the weekends. It had been ordinary in the best possible way. The beacon was broadcasting on emergency frequency. That meant something had gone very wrong. "Get us there," Owen said. "Full burn." The Ironside moved. For 4 hours, no one on the bridge said much. Nora ran deep scans ahead of their position, trying to pick up anything useful. The rest of the night crew came to their stations quietly and stayed alert. Owen stood at the viewport and watched the stars slide past, and did not let himself think about what they might find. When Kepler 62F appeared on the long-range display, Owen knew immediately that it was bad. The thermal signature was wrong. A living colony had a certain kind of warmth. Power plants, buildings, vehicles, the general heat of 40,000 people going about their lives. What the display showed was different. It showed the scattered heat of fires, burning without anyone to put them out. They dropped into orbit, and the full picture came through on the screens. The colony was gone. Not damaged, not attacked and struggling. Gone. The main settlement had been reduced to rubble. The outlying farms were scorched black. The small landing port where supply ships used to dock was a crater. The Ironside sensors swept the surface again and again, looking for life signs, finding almost none. A handful of people had survived by hiding in underground storage facilities. When Owen sent a shuttle down to bring them up, they came aboard shaking and hollow-eyed, unable to speak for a long time. One man, a farmer named Dale, finally told them what had happened. He said the ships appeared without warning. They were large, much larger than anything the colony had ever seen. They did not broadcast any message or demand or warning. They simply opened fire. The whole attack lasted less than 20 minutes. Then the ships left. Just like that. Nora pulled sensor logs from the wreckage and matched the ship signatures against the Concord database. It took her 11 minutes. When she looked up from her screen, her face was very still. "Vreth Dominion," she said. Owen had heard the name before. Every officer in the Earth fleet had. The Vreth Dominion was one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the Galactic Concord. They controlled hundreds of systems. Their fleet was enormous. They had been part of the Concord for over 4 centuries, and in that entire time had never once been seriously challenged by any other member species. They were also known for something else. They were the species that had voted against humanity's admission to the Concord 31 years ago. They had argued, in formal chambers, that humans were too young, too emotional, too unstable to be trusted among civilized galactic society. They had been outvoted. They had never forgotten it. Nora pulled up more data from the wreckage. She cross-referenced Vreth communication intercepts that human intelligence had quietly been collecting for years. It took time, but the picture that formed was clear. The Vreth Dominion had classified Kepler-62f as part of an old territorial claim, a claim so old and so minor that no one had thought to flag it. They had looked at the planet, looked at the species that had colonized it, and decided that humanity would not respond in any meaningful way. They had chosen this colony on purpose. They had chosen it because they believed humanity was weak. Owen stood at the viewport for a long time after Nora finished her briefing. Below them, the fires on the colony surface were still burning. 40,000 people had lived there a day ago. He thought about the market square. He thought about the children running in the fields. He pressed one hand flat against the cold glass of the viewport and breathed slowly. Around him, the bridge was silent. His crew watched him and waited. There were protocols for this. There were forms to file, reports to send, channels to go through. He had followed all of them for 22 years in the Earth fleet. He believed in order. He believed in doing things the right way. He picked up the secure channel handset and opened a direct line to Earth Command. The officer on the other end answered on the second ring. Owen gave his identification code, gave the coordinates, gave the casualty estimate. He spoke in a flat, even voice and said everything clearly and without emotion. Then he paused. "I need you to pass a message up the chain," he said, "all the way up, to whoever is sitting in the room that makes decisions." "What's the message, Commander?" Owen looked out at the burning planet one more time. "Tell them we received the Vreth Dominion's message," he said. "Tell them we understand it perfectly. And tell them we are sending a reply." He clicked off the channel and turned back to his crew. "Nobody sleeps," he said quietly. "Pull everything we have on Vreth fleet movements in this sector. I want full damage documentation on the colony surface. I want every survivor's account recorded and filed. We do this right. We do this completely." He walked back to the captain's chair and sat down. Outside, the stars were still quiet, but something had changed in them. Something cold and deliberate and very old had woken up in the dark between the planets, and it was wearing a human face. The Vreth Dominion had made their move. They had done it because they believed humanity would accept it. They had no idea what they had started. "Congratulations! You just declared war on the wrong species. Humanity doesn't forgive. What humanity remembers." The Galactic Concord issued its statement 48 hours after the attack. It was a careful statement, full of measured language and diplomatic phrases. It expressed deep concern. It called for calm on all sides. It urged both humanity and the Vreth Dominion to pursue a peaceful resolution through established Concord channels. It reminded all member species that military conflict was discouraged within Concord-recognized space. Ambassador Lyle Carter read the statement in his office at the Concord headquarters on the neutral station of Velos Prime. He read it twice, very slowly. Then he set it down on his desk, folded his hands, and stared at the far wall for several minutes without moving. He had spent 30 years as a diplomat. He had negotiated border agreements, trade disputes, and cultural misunderstandings between species who sometimes communicated in ways no human translator could fully untangle. He had always believed, deeply and genuinely, that talking was better than fighting. He still believed that. But he also believed that there were moments when talking without teeth was just noise. He picked up his pen and began writing his own statement. In Geneva, the Joint Command emergency session had been running for 16 hours straight. Admiral Grace Donovan sat at the head of the long table and listened to report after report from generals and intelligence chiefs and fleet coordinators. She did not speak much. She asked precise questions and wrote down the answers in a small notebook she kept on the table in front of her. When someone gave her an answer she considered incomplete, she looked at them over the rim of her glasses and waited until they gave her a better one. By hour 17, she had a complete picture. She stood up and laid out her plan. It was not what anyone in the room expected. Several generals had come in ready to argue for immediate military strikes. A few diplomats in the room had prepared arguments for restraint. Donovan's plan was neither of those things, and both of them at once. She spoke for 40 minutes without raising her voice. When she was done, the room was very quiet. What she proposed was not a tantrum. It was not a revenge strike. It was a doctrine, a full-spectrum plan that combined military pressure, economic disruption, intelligence operations, and diplomatic positioning into a single coordinated effort. Every piece fed every other piece. It would be slow at first, almost invisible, and then it would be everywhere at once. The Vreth Dominion would not see the whole shape of it until it was too late to respond to any part of it. One of the generals asked her how long it would take. Donovan said, as long as it needs to. He asked if she was sure humanity had the endurance for a long campaign. She looked at him, the way a person looks at someone who has just said something genuinely puzzling. We are the species, she said, that survived 2 world wars, multiple extinction-level disease events, a near collapse of our own ecosystem, and 4 separate periods in our history where we genuinely thought we might not make it another 100 years. We are the species that looked at all of that, kept going anyway, and then built ships and left our home planet to go find more challenges. She closed her notebook. Endurance is not something I am worried about. On Valus Prime, Ambassador Carter stood up in the full session of the Galactic Concord and asked to be recognized. The Concord chamber was an enormous circular room with seating for representatives of over 200 species. The acoustics were designed so that every voice carried equally, regardless of how loud or soft the speaker was. When Carter began to speak, the room was so quiet that his footsteps on the raised platform were audible. He spoke for 22 minutes. He did not deliver the speech that the Concord expected. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not appeal for justice in vague terms. He opened by naming every one of the 40,000 people killed on Kepler 62F. Not all 40,000 by name, because that would take hours, but enough of them. He read names for the first 4 minutes. Children's names. The names of teachers and engineers and farmers. He read them slowly, one by one, so that everyone in that chamber had to sit with each one. Then he told the Concord what humanity intended to do. He told them humanity was invoking Article 7 of the Concord Charter, the right of absolute redress. It was a clause that had been written into the charter by one of the founding species over 5 centuries ago and had never been used. It gave any member species the legal right to pursue complete and unrestricted retaliation against an aggressor without Concord interference, provided the aggressor had struck first without declaration. The chamber erupted. Several ambassadors spoke at once. The Felian representative called for an immediate procedural vote to block the invocation. The Dominion of Sec sent a representative to the floor to argue that Article 7 was never intended for situations like this. 3 different species simultaneously requested that humanity submit to a mediation process first. Carter waited for the noise to die down. He did not hurry. He stood at the platform and waited, and when the room was quiet again, he said one more thing. I want to remind this chamber, he said, that we did not begin this. We built a colony on a legally recognized world. We farmed it and lived on it and raised children on it for 11 years. We did nothing to the Vreth Dominion. They came to our world and they destroyed it and everyone in it because they thought we would not answer. He paused. We are answering. He sat down. Back on the Ironside, Nora Caldwell had spent the past 2 days compiling a full intelligence report on Vreth military movements in the Kepler sector. She finished it just after midnight on the ship's clock, sent it to Earth Command, and then sat back in her chair and did something she had not done since the attack. She let herself feel it. She thought about the survivor named Dale, who had come up from the surface shaking. She thought about his face. She thought about what the colony had looked like from orbit, all that black scorched earth where green fields used to be. She pulled up humanity's historical archive on her screen, not military records, but general history. She read for a long time. She read about wars and plagues and collapses, and all the moments where the human story should have ended and did not. And slowly, something settled in her chest. Not anger, not comfort, something harder and quieter than either of those things. She closed the archive. She went back to work. 48 hours later, the Concord voted on whether to block humanity's invocation of Article 7. The vote was close, very close. When it became clear which way it was going to go, the Felian ambassador made one final appeal to Carter to withdraw the invocation in exchange for a formal Concord censure of the Vreth Dominion. Carter considered it for exactly 3 seconds. No, he said. The vote failed. Article 7 stood. Humanity was free to act without restraint. In the Vreth Dominion's capital, Supreme Commander Keth Varos received the news and dismissed it. His advisors told him not to worry. His generals reminded him of the size of the Vreth fleet compared to humanity's. One of his senior advisors, a creature who had served the Dominion for 60 years, laughed and said, "What exactly are they going to do?" Nobody in that room knew the answer to that question. Congratulations, you just declared war on the wrong species. Humanity doesn't forgive. The long reach. 6 months passed and the Vreth Dominion was still waiting for the war to begin. They had positioned their border fleets, they had reinforced their outer systems, they had launched extra patrol routes along every approach from human-controlled space. Their admirals studied human fleet movement data and prepared responses for every possible attack scenario they could imagine. They were ready for a charge. They were ready for a fight. What they were not ready for was silence. Because for the first 3 months, nothing obvious happened. No fleets advanced. No major battles were declared. The human ships near the border went about their usual routes. The news coming out of Earth was grim but quiet. The Vreth Dominion's High Command met twice a week and read the same reports and came to the same conclusion each time. The humans were either too afraid or too disorganized to respond in any serious way. They were wrong on both counts. Cole Atkins had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 6 months. He was not a soldier in the way that Owen Reeves was a soldier. He did not wear a uniform on most days, and he did not carry a weapon in a visible place. He ran a small team of 31 people, most of whom the Vreth Dominion did not know existed. They worked out of an unmarked facility on a station near the edge of human space. And what they did day after day was pull apart the Vreth Dominion from the inside. Cole's people had spent years before the war quietly building a network inside Vreth's supply chains, trade routes, fuel depot contracts, logistics companies that moved military cargo without wearing military markings. When the attack on Kepler 62F happened, Cole had activated every piece of that network at once. By month 2, 3 of the Vreth Dominion's primary fuel suppliers had quietly switched their contracts to other buyers. The official reason given was pricing disputes. The real reason was that Cole's team had made them a better offer and a quiet promise of protection. By month 3, 2 Vreth military cargo companies had started making small, consistent errors in their delivery schedules. Arriving late, delivering to wrong coordinates, losing shipments in bureaucratic confusion. Nothing dramatic, nothing that looked like sabotage. Just the slow, grinding friction of a supply chain that no longer worked the way it was supposed to. The Vreth admirals noticed the logistics problems. They blamed internal inefficiency. They fired 3 supply officers. The problems continued. Meanwhile, Owen Reeves and the Ironside were not sitting still. For 6 months, Owen had been leading a strike group of 7 ships along the Vreth border. Their mission was not to engage the main Vreth fleet. Their mission was smaller and far more damaging. The Vreth Dominion used a network of listening posts to monitor all movement in their border space. Sensor stations positioned at key points across hundreds of thousands of kilometers of territory. The network was their eyes. Without it, they were blind. Owen's strike group took the listening posts apart, one at a time, in the dark. They never attacked the same sector twice in a row. They never followed a predictable pattern. They moved fast, hit a post, and were gone before any Vreth response ship could arrive. By the end of month 4, Owen's group had destroyed or disabled 31 of the border listening posts. The Vreth Border Command was screaming for answers. Their reports back to the capital described it as a ghost, something that struck and disappeared, leaving no trail. In the capital, Keth Varos was no longer dismissing the reports. He was also not sleeping well. On the ground, Private First Class Amber Osei was lying flat behind a collapsed wall on the border world of Venkara, and she was thinking very hard about staying alive. Her unit had been inserted 6 days ago as part of a rapid response deployment to support local Vreth border resistance fighters, who had requested human military assistance. The mission briefing had made it sound manageable. The reality, as missions often did, had turned out to be harder than the briefing suggested. Her squad was 7 people. They were holding a position in a bombed-out district of a small city, while a much larger Vreth patrol unit tried to push them out. They had limited ammunition, 2 days of rations left, and a communication link that worked intermittently at best. Amber's squad leader, Corporal Danny Lau, had taken a hit to the shoulder 2 days in, and was still moving, but slower than he should be. Amber was 23 years old. She had grown up in Ohio. She had joined the Earth Fleet because she believed in something, though in the past 6 days she had occasionally lost track of what exactly that something was. But she had not stopped moving. She had not stopped making decisions. She called in position updates during every window when the comms worked. She managed their remaining ammunition with careful attention. She kept her squad's morale from collapsing, not with speeches, but by staying steady herself. If she was afraid, and she was, deeply, she did not let it run her. On the 5th day, a human gunship broke through the cloud cover, and the Vreth patrol scattered. When the extraction team came to pull them out, the team leader looked at Amber's unit, 7 people, holding a position that the tactical map said should have been overrun on day 2, and said, "How did you hold that long?" Amber thought about it. "We didn't have anywhere else to be," she said. Back in the Concord chambers, the Vreth Dominion's ambassador had begun making quiet inquiries through back channels. The language was careful and indirect, as Vreth diplomatic language always was, but the meaning was clear. They wanted to know if there was a way to pause the current situation, a temporary cessation of whatever was happening to their supply lines and their border network. A conversation about terms. The message was passed to Admiral Donovan's office. Donovan read it and set it on her desk. She called Ambassador Carter. Carter read it. There was a short silence on the line. "What do you think?" Carter asked. "I think they still believe this is a negotiation," Donovan said. "And is it?" Another silence. "Not yet," she said. She filed the message and went back to work. In the capital of the Vreth Dominion, Keth Varos stood in front of his strategic map and looked at the numbers. Fuel delivery delays were up by 30%. Border post availability was down to 62% and falling. 3 of his fleet commanders near the human border had filed requests for resupply that could not be fulfilled on the usual schedule. His logistics chief had given him a report that morning describing the situation as a chain of small failures that are beginning to create large consequences. He thought about what his advisor had said 6 months ago in this very room. What exactly are they going to do? He looked at the map for a long time. "General," he said to the officer beside him, "get me the Concord diplomatic channel. I want to send word to the human ambassador." He paused. "Tell them we are open to a discussion of terms." The general exhaled slowly, with the particular exhaustion of someone who had known for weeks that this moment was coming. Keth Vardos watched the map a moment longer. The red indicators blinked steadily, each one a small failure in a system that used to be perfect. "But I want it noted," he added quietly, almost to himself, "that I do not believe they are interested in terms anymore." He was more right about that than he knew. "Congratulations. You just declared war on the wrong species. Humanity doesn't forgive. No ceasefire in memory." The Vreth Dominion formally requested a ceasefire on a Tuesday morning. The request came through the official Galactic Concord channel, stamped with the seal of the Dominion's High Command, and signed personally by Keth Vardos. It was written in careful, formal language that described the past several months as a period of unfortunate escalation, and expressed a desire to return to a framework of structured dialogue. It made no mention of Kepler-62F by name. It made no mention of 40,000 dead. Ambassador Lyle Carter read the request at his desk on Velas Prime. Then he set it face down on the desk, and walked to the window and looked out at the docking arms of the station for a few minutes. He thought about the first time he had come to Velas Prime, 29 years ago, fresh to his posting, full of the conviction that patient and honest diplomacy could solve anything given enough time. He had believed that sincerely. Part of him still did. But he also understood something now that he had not fully understood then. Patience only meant something when the other party took you seriously, and the Vreth Dominion had spent 30 years treating humanity like a small inconvenience that could be moved or removed whenever it became useful to do so. The request on his desk was not diplomacy. It was a species that had finally felt pain asking for the pain to stop, without being willing to say what it had done to cause it. He turned from the window and began writing his response. The Concord called a full session 3 days later. Several of the elder race ambassadors had spent those 3 days privately contacting Carter and urging him toward moderation. The Thelian ambassador, a being named Sorovel who had been a diplomat for longer than the human space program had existed, visited Carter personally. He sat across the desk and spoke slowly, and said that the Concord was growing concerned about the precedent being set. He said that the scale of humanity's response was unsettling to many of the member species. He said that a negotiated settlement would reflect well on humanity and demonstrate the maturity that some members of the Concord had once questioned. Carter listened to all of this politely. When Sorovel finished, Carter thanked him for coming and said he would take everything into consideration. Then he went into the Concord session and set humanity's terms on the table. The room was not ready for what he put down. The terms were not complicated. They were direct, and they were complete. The Vreth Dominion would formally and publicly acknowledge, in the permanent record of the Galactic Concord, that the attack on Kepler-62F was an unprovoked act of aggression against a civilian population. They would accept the designation of aggressor in the Concord's historical record, which could never be altered or removed. They would pay reparations in territory, resources, and formal political acknowledgement. Not in Vreth currency which could be devalued, but in things that could not be taken back. And they would do all of this in this chamber, in front of every member species, out loud, with no softened language and no diplomatic cushioning. There was a long silence after Carter finished speaking. Then the room began to react. 3 ambassadors spoke at once. The Sec Dominion representative said the terms were punitive beyond any historical precedent. The Vreth ambassador, a tall creature named Veth Saran, who had maintained his composure through months of bad news, stood up and said that his government would never accept public humiliation as a condition of peace. Several other representatives called for Carter to submit a revised proposal, a softer version, something both sides could live with. Carter waited for all of it to finish. He was good at waiting. When the room was quiet, he said, "I want to be clear about something. These are not opening terms. These are the terms. The discussion this body needs to have is not about what humanity will accept in place of these terms. The discussion is about whether the Vreth Dominion signs them voluntarily or signs them after the situation on their border becomes considerably worse." Vatsorin said very carefully that humanity was not in a position to make that kind of threat. Carter looked at him for a moment and said, "I am not making a threat. I am describing a timeline." The session ended without a resolution. The Concord asked both parties to return in 72 hours. In those 72 hours, Amber Osei was released from the military medical facility, where she had been recovering from a fragment wound to the leg she had taken during the final push on Venkara. The wound was not serious. She was cleared for light duty. She sat in the recovery ward and watched the news coverage of the Concord sessions and did not say much. One of the nurses, a man named Art, asked her what she thought was going to happen. Amber thought about it for a while. "They'll sign," she said. Art asked how she was so sure. Amber looked at the ceiling. "Because we're not stopping," she said. "And they know it now. They know we're not stopping." Owen Reeves had taken the Ironside to Kepler 62F. He did not tell Earth Command he was going. He filed a flight log entry that described it as a survey run, and left it at that. He took a shuttle down to the surface alone, and walked through the ruins of the main settlement for 2 hours. It was quiet down there. Wind moved through the broken structures. Weeds had started to grow in the rubble, which struck him as the most human thing he had seen in months. Nature deciding to continue, regardless of what had happened. He walked until he reached what had been the market square. There was almost nothing left of it. A section of a wall, part of a stone path. He stood there and looked at it, and breathed the cold air, and thought about the farmer named Dale, who had come up from the underground storage, shaking and hollow. He thought about the months of work that had followed. The logistics network Cole had dismantled piece by piece. The 31 listening posts his group had taken apart in the dark. All the careful, cold machinery of it. He was glad it had been done. He was also not sure what to do with the person who had done it. He was not sure those two things were in conflict. He stood in the ruins for a long time, and did not find a clean answer. He did not expect to. He flew back to the Ironside, and filed the survey report, and put it behind him. 72 hours after the session ended, the Vreth Dominion signed. Every clause, every word. Veth Sorin read the acknowledgement aloud in the Concord chamber, because the terms required it to be spoken, not just written. He read it in a flat voice with no expression, and the chamber was so quiet that each sentence landed in the silence like a stone dropped in still water. When it was done, no one applauded, no one made a speech. Carter simply acknowledged receipt, confirmed the record was permanent, and closed the session. In the corridor outside the chamber, the Thelian ambassador Sorovel fell into step beside Carter. "You got everything you asked for," he said. "Yes," Carter said. "Are you satisfied?" Carter walked a few more steps before answering. "I'm not sure satisfied is the right word," he said. "I think the right word is finished." Sorovel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know what my aide said to me when this began? Not to ever give humanity a reason." Carter looked at him. "That's not a bad note," he said. He kept walking.
In the wake of destruction, a new dawn rose over Kepler 62F, a planet scarred yet alive with the echo of resilience. 1 year had passed since the signing of the Vreth Accords, a fragile hope born from the ashes of war. The first modest structures, a small medical center and 2 housing blocks, emerged painfully from the planet's scorched ground. They stood as silent witnesses to the conflict that had ravaged this land, stirring a complex blend of grief and pride in the hearts of those who dared to return. Sandra Okafor was one of those first brave souls. With her heart heavy yet determined, she carried 2 worn bags and a small photograph of her husband and sister, lost in the chaos of that fateful attack. As she stepped onto the new streets, her senses awakened to the world around her. The faint smell of fresh paint mingled with the earthy scent of the surrounding fields, still barren and waiting for a chance to thrive. Each step was a negotiation between past memories and present realities, her eyes scanning the landscape for remnants of what once was. The market square remained a ghostly promise, but the essentials of life were beginning to take root. She paused at the edge of the construction zone, gazing out at the horizon. The once vast fields, now empty, held the lingering whispers of what was lost. Memories cascaded through her mind, laughter, love, life, and for a moment, she was frozen in the tension between despair and hope. With a deep breath, she turned away and ventured inside her new home, embarking on the arduous journey of rebuilding her life. The first structure erected was a long white memorial wall, etched deeply with the names of 40,000 souls, each marked with equal weight, devoid of rank or title. It stood resolute against the sky, a solemn tribute to lives extinguished. Visitors flocked to it at all hours, enveloped in a quiet reverence, their footsteps soft, and their voices hushed. On a clear autumn morning, Owen Reeves found himself drawn to that wall. He wore simplicity in his attire, having just submitted his retirement papers after years of service in the shadows, dismantling the machinery of a galactic empire. Standing before the names carved into the stone, he felt the enormity of the past year wash over him. Each unfamiliar name became a reminder of the cold, calculated decisions made behind closed doors, the dark operations that had unfolded in the stillness of night. He pondered whether the response to the unprovoked attack had been just. The weight of that question pressed heavily on his conscience. Time slipped away as he lingered at the memorial, wrestling with the complexities of morality, honor, and the aftermath of war. After an hour of introspection, he turned and walked back towards the transport that would carry him home, feeling the weight of history settled on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Cole Atkins remained a shadow, avoiding the spotlight of recognition that his strategic brilliance deserved. He had orchestrated the downfall of an empire, yet found solace in the anonymity of the intelligence service. When not buried in reports, he wrestled with the echoes of his actions, striving to maintain an honest account of the choices made in the dark. Nora Caldwell, having transitioned to a diplomatic role under Ambassador Carter on Velas Prime, navigated the complex web of interspecies relations. Her analytical mind was sharp, perceiving threats and opportunities with an unsettling foresight. During a quiet evening, when the weight of their shared past surfaced, Carter asked if the galaxy felt safer now. More careful, she mused, understanding that safety was a fragile illusion built on the lessons learned from devastation. Across the cosmos, Amber Osei found herself rooted back in Ohio, enrolling in an engineering program. The rigors of academia provided a welcome distraction as she slowly pieced together a life that felt authentically hers. Yet, the memories of then Kara lingered, the quiet understanding of a shared trauma with her classmates, a palpable gap she could not bridge. At night, she would scroll through the memorial feed, reading the names that symbolize not just loss, but the very essence of humanity's struggle and strength. As spring approached, the Ironside, a ship that had borne witness to the trials of war, was quietly decommissioned. A ceremony marked its end, attended by only a handful, yet it echoed the significance of what had transpired. In the ship's final log, Nora's calm voice resonated with conviction, a declaration that humanity had not sought conflict, but had risen to protect its right to exist. The recording concluded, leaving the officer in silence, contemplating the weight of her words. Outside, the stars twinkled with the promise of futures yet to be written. Humanity, now changed by the trials it had endured, moved forward, unyielding in their pursuit of a place among the stars, bearing both the scars and the strength of their journey. In the end, it was the essence of being human, to carry the weight of history and still reach for tomorrow.